Welcome to this Q&A for the 2020 edition of New Directors, New Films, a co-presentation of Film at Lincoln Center and the Museum of Modern Art. I'm Dennis Lim, co-chair of the selection committee, and I'm delighted to be joined by Catarina Vasconcelos, the director of the Metamorphosis of Birds. Thank you for joining us today, Catarina.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much for your wonderful invite. I'm super happy to be here with you.
This is Catarina's first feature film. It premiered at the Berlinale earlier this year, where it won a couple of prizes. Of course, it was scheduled to be in the physical edition of New Directors in March, but we've now are presenting this virtually, and so I want to thank you for agreeing to be part of this rescheduled edition. Let me start with just a question about your approach to this really beautiful, but also I think really unusual film. There's the sentiment that comes up in the film that what we don't know, we can invent. What we don't remember, what we can't explain, we can invent. And I think that is very much the motto of the film. And I'm wondering, at what point did this become your approach? Or was that your approach from the start, or is this something that came about as you were trying to understand and trying to remember things?
No, not at all. And I think it's wonderful to start this Q&A with this sentence, because I think that's the key of the film. We are always trying to find keys of our films, but I think that might be actually the key of the film. When I started to do the Metamorphosis of Birds, I started to speak with the members of my family in order to know more about this woman, Beatriz, grandmother Trish, and my aunt and uncles, and my father, they were extremely generous in what they were telling me. But I always got the weird sensation that they were hiding something from me. Like there were some things that they were not telling me, and I was very annoyed because I didn't understand why was this happening. And then I kind of made a peace with that, because I understood that this it wasn't something that they weren't telling me. This is how families work. It's how they operate. There are things that are not told. And maybe this is what makes families to keep on going, existing. There are some secrets and mysteries that are part of this group of people. So at the same time, there were some things about my own mother and my own memories that I started to have the feeling that I was forgetting them, and some of them that I would never get to know because my mother died far too young. And so I got this feeling with my family and my own memories that, well, if they are not telling me something and I don't know how to do it, I don't know I don't have this information, maybe I can invent it. Because the film started, I said, I'm going to make a documentary about this person. But then I had all of these white blank spaces, like, these tests when you are a kid, you have the blank spaces you have to fill in. And I felt a bit this with the information I got. There are some things I didn't know, so I had to invent it. So actually, it came from the process of the film itself and the process of the information I got and the information that I didn't have. Yeah.
Right. I'm curious if you can talk about just the process of conceptualizing and writing the film. It's a film in which sound and image work together in such interesting ways, but I'm wondering whether you started with text or you started with images and how they came together for you.
I'm Portuguese. I come from Portugal, and there's something that I think we have for a long time is this tradition of literature. It's something that we grew up with for a long time. And so this is something that was always a very big inspiration for me. At the same time, I don't come from a cinema background. I come from a fine arts background. So when I started to write the script of the film, I wrote it like all of these images, descriptions of these images that were all the plans of the film. And then I had some little notes on what the voiceover would be about, but the script was mainly the description of the images. At the same time, I studied music since I was very young. I play violin, and I always had this feeling when I was young and I was playing in an orchestra that there was a sort of law in the world, something that connected us all when we were playing these, like Bach, Mozart, I don't know, all of these classical guys. There was this sort of, the world made sense when you were playing music. And so after shooting all of the film, and after doing the editing, me and the editor, Francisco Moreira, we decided together that I would need now sometimes to write the film, to write the voiceover. So after doing the editing, I spent like 5 or 6 months by myself, just writing the voiceover. And the voiceover was written with this idea of all of these voices, all of these different, like an orchestra, like you have the bass, which is a narrator, which is my father. Then you have the soprano, like Beatriz. Then you have the tenor, which the alto, and all of these different voices, the children. So the score of the film, of the voices, was a bit thought like the score of a music, like almost an operatic thing. And then on top of this, Miguel Martins, that made the sound design of the film, he found out some elements in between all of these lines to enhance all of this score of the voices. So this was pretty much like the process of building the film itself.
So you started with the images. You had an edit of the images before you even did the sound or wrote the text.
Yeah, no. I started with the images. I had just some little notes on the text, on the sequence of the images, and how I wanted the story. It's like I had the narrative of the story. Yeah. I wanted to go from here, there, and there, and but I didn't have the text. No. Then I spent this time by myself. It was a bit hard sometimes, but yeah, this was how it worked out.
Wow. Can you say a little bit then about how you thought of the visual language of the film, using these tableau, these sort of still life, sequences, and then some moments that seem to match what we hear, but some moments that also depart from it, so just the conceptualizing the visual language of the film and also shooting in 16 millimeter, which I assume was something was important to you too.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, it was about the 16 millimeter. Something that as I didn't know my grandmother, I just knew some things about her. The fact that she lived in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and so I thought that my grandmother, she didn't live in the digital era. She didn't live digitally. She lived in film era. So for me, it was important that Beatriz's life would be portrait in 16 millimeter. And then when she dies, the film becomes digital. Although we worked it quite a lot so that you don't feel immediately, but you can feel sometimes a little bit, because film is physical. You can touch it, whereas the digital you can't. And so in the film there was as well this bit, more for me, I know, this feeling of like losing someone was losing the film as well, was losing this possibility of touching it. As for the images, I was saying, as I come from this fine art background, I was always very in love with painting, and I'm terrible painting. I don't know how to draw. I'm terrible with all of this, but all my colleagues in the Fine Arts Academy that were painters, I was always very surprised with their ability. And every time I could, I would sneak into the classes of painting, because I was studying graphic design, so that I could watch them, because there was this gesture of portraying the world with your hand, and I was always very amazed with that. And saying that, I think I was very amazed the first time that I got in touch with painting of the beginning of the Renaissance, Giotto, and you feel this huge emotion of feeling that these people were inventing the world for the first time. I mean, Giotto has the first paintings where you have perspective, which is something that we don't think today. We have it. But he has the first paintings where you have this. So in the film as well, there was this idea of inventing a family, inventing the world, and of growing a family as well. In the case of Beatriz and Henrique, they are actually making a family. So in the film as well, having these references to these Jan van Eyck paintings, the Flemish paintings of the late Renaissance, where you have all of this contrast, and these nature morte, the still lives. I was always very impressed with this idea of still life, which in Portuguese is natureza morta, in French, nature morte. Because for me it was always very weird that the nature could be dead.
Right.
How can this work? So for me it was again bringing these stills where there was life going inside. This tableau vivant was something that was very important in building the film. Let's put it like this.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit about how this? I think one of the strengths of the film is how it's not just a family story, but it opens up into, I think, in so many different ways, and one way is the way in which this thing that seems private, that seems insular, kind of opens up into the infinite, into how your family story across generations is always in conversation with the natural and the cosmic world, the trees, the water, the birds. Obviously water is obviously an important part with your grandparents' story, but can you say more about how this becomes a film about, so much more than like a family, but about this something much larger and more metaphysical?
I was quite concerned. It took me almost 6 years to make the film, and during this time I was quite concerned on how this film could not only relate to my family. Because I must say, this is a quite banal story. There's nothing very original about it. I mean, it's the death of a mother, which is unfortunately something that many people went through, and maybe many people will go through this. So it's quite a banal story. The way to tell it would be its uniqueness, let's put it like this. But something that I got to understand was to know a bit about my grandmother, was as well to understand a bit her faith. Beatriz, she was very Catholic. She was a woman that had a huge faith in God, which is something that I don't have. I don't believe. I'm not a believer, let's put it like this. But I started to read the Bible and all of these books, and at the same time that I was reading a lot about the dictatorship in Portugal and how the religion had a huge importance during these years in Portugal. But then I started to see little things like how Beatriz as well connected to the world. The fact that she loved gardening, the fact that these lands of the family that exist in the south of Portugal, that she planted all of the trees, and there are like tons of trees. So she had a huge relationship with something that I relate as well, which is the nature. So and my mother had that as well. So I started to think that I don't believe in this idea of a God, but if I need to believe in something, then I believe in the nature, in the sense of this huge solace that nature can give us of you have autumn, you have winter, but then you have the springtime, and this idea of like things die, but then things are born again. So in this sense, and was something that brought me a lot of consolation. And so in the second part of the film, when you have all of these shots in the mountains as well, something which is bigger than we are, and kind of puts us in perspective in the world. It brought me as well a lot of space to reflect and to think about what is this thing we call death. How do we keep on going, and how do nature keep on going as well? So in this sense, I think the invocation of the natural world is as well a way for us to try to find answers that we don't find in our daily life.
The other way in which the film opens up is also interesting, is how you bring in, you get a sense of the colonial history with this in the sequence with the stamps, And then there's this bit about like gender roles, from a particular. So it's also interesting how the film goes beyond just the story of your family to encompass like bigger contexts as well. So that's something that emerges in as you write, or you had already thought of those images at the start.
Yeah, no, it emerged when I was speaking with my aunt Teresa. Teresa is the only girl in between the boys,
right,
so she's
right.
the only daughter. And it was one of the hardest conversations was with Teresa, with my aunt, because I understood perfectly how she suffered for being a woman in between men. Like Teresa had to do tasks that the rest of the brothers didn't have to. Teresa was overwhelmed with work while her brothers could go and play. So actually to be a woman during those years of the dictatorship in Portugal was terrible, was horrible. I mean, we still have this huge difference between what's being a man and a woman. Like in Portugal is outrageous that women still receive like 20% less than men in wages. But back then was like incredibly harder. Beatriz was never able to work because it was just assumed that she would be home taking care of the children. So when I was hearing all of this and I was actually researching on what was like to be a woman in the dictatorship in Portugal, for me it became quite clear that this was something that needed to be addressed as well. We needed to speak about what were women role and women tasks and men tasks. So this is how it appears as well, a bit this thing with Teresa with the hairdryer. At the same time, to make this film without giving it a context on of what was the period of when this family was growing, I thought it was not only risky, but at the same it would be very sad not to give a context of what was going on. And so this huge stamp collection that my grandfather had, when I was one day looking at it, it's like tons of stamps. It's insane. And no one in the family knew what to do with them because they are too much. And one day I was just going through them and I got this kind of, I understood that was the history of Portugal told in a very weird way, especially the colonial story of Portugal. So to play with these stamps, that was just this random collection of my grandfather actually became something much bigger. It was a way of explaining the relationship of Portugal with the exterior and the colony war, and which was something that actually had a huge impact in my family through the discussions that then the kids have with their parents, and so this was more or less how it turned out to be.
You brought in this idea of music, this musicality, and how you compose the narration. Can you talk a little bit about the actual music in the film, the use of music in the film as well?
Yeah, I'm always quite. When I was preparing the film, I had this huge playlist of music that I've heard for like 6 years during this, like continuously. And then I think you hear it so much that you are just like, one or two of them will go in the film. This is the case of some of them, which is the Rossini, the Kyrie eleison of Rossini, and Kyrie eleison is Lord, please have mercy on us. And this appears when Zulmir is cutting the fish, and it is as well the beginning of the stamp collection. So it has this very it's a very strong music, and so this was the first one. Then in the first music that appears in the film is a Liszt sonata, which is called Saint Francis Preaching to the Birds. So for me it was like a little twist, having this like a little link to Liszt. And then you have the chaconne, then you have Schubert, the piano sonata of Schubert, which I find it terribly beautiful. I will explain you what I feel with it. It is almost like a lullaby, but it could be a funeral as well. So for me, this and the life of Schubert has this huge tragedy as well. He died too young. He died mad, and his music is almost a portrait of an end that was too soon. So for me, using Schubert is as well this kind of I don't know. A huge importance to this composer. And then you have, of course, the Bach chaconne. And the chaconne is, when I did the conservatory, and then in the last year, you need to have this exam. And I had to play the chaconne. And I never managed to do it, never, because it's too hard. My mother had died some few months before, just before, and I could never do it. But it doesn't make me sad. Actually, to use it in the film, it's the best way. And it's like the chaconne was always with me during these years. And this story of Bach with his family. So it's a grieving song, but at the same time, I think it's a wonderful song for the ones who are alive.
I wanted to come back to and maybe ask you to say a little bit more about this research process that you've already alluded to, about like talking to your family members, and if you can say a little bit about what that was like, like who did you speak to, and was everybody very willing to participate? Were you also going through physical objects, and was it? Yeah, just want to hear more about how that research process was like for you.
Yeah, so actually it all began with my father. I was living in London when the idea of the film started, and while I was in London, I was having this Skype conversation that now is completely usual in our daily lives. But back then, I would speak to him from time to time, and at the middle of this conversation, he told me, Catarina, by the way, your grandfather wants to burn the letters, the correspondence between him and your grandmother. And I was in shock with this. I was very shocked, and we had a bit of an argument because I was like, no, this can't be right. Because I was very sure that by reading the letters, I would come to know Beatriz, or at least to know something about her. And of course, in the end, he told me, no, but this is the intimacy of two persons. You can't just go in and read these letters. And then I came to Lisbon. And my father told me, but Catarina, there's something that you might enjoy a lot, which is when I was very young, your grandmother took me and your uncles and aunt to the post office to make a record to send to your grandfather. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. If this is true, I should have known for a long time, because it looked like science fiction. And he was like, no, this is true. I'm not kidding. So we went to the house of my grandparents and we found the vinyl. It was very, very old, because it was made in 1957. So I had to take it to London to kind of to clean it. And then the first time I heard it, it was the first time I heard the voice of Beatriz. And this is the end of the film as well. So,
right. So
that was very touching for me. So after this, I started to have all of these conversations with all of my uncles. And these interviews, they were extremely long, very, very long. And no, they were not, all of them were, in the beginning, they were like, in the beginning of this very long conversation, they were like trying to be very, very efficient. Like, what do you want to know? Like, this was like if I was a stranger, okay, she was born in this day, and then she would, and then bit by bit, they would deconstruct, and then they were telling me small details, which actually is what makes people, like what was her favorite tea, what she'd like to do on Saturdays mornings, her huge love for fabrics, I don't know, these kind of small things. And then there was something incredibly beautiful that I asked them to tell me, if they could, how was the day of her death, of Beatriz's death. and all of them, or most of them, got extremely emotional, like they were leaving that day again. So, and this was of a huge generosity. Like they share with me something which is one of the biggest pains that they have. So just to tell you that, but during these 6 years, like in the beginning, they were extremely excited with the film. Then there was a big suspicious, like, why would you do a film about someone that you didn't know? How can you do that? She's our mother. And then they forgot about the film, which was great for me, because then I could keep on going without them noticing. And then I started to do like a casting with my cousins to enter in the film, because the younger ones, they are their grandchildren, my little cousins. So, and then they started to be like, okay, I can see where she's going. And then they started to be again very excited about this. And in the end, it became like this sort of family saga. So I say that it's a film about a family, but it is with the family. It's more a film with the family. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, coming back to this idea of invention and, introducing fiction into reality, into documentary, I think your film makes it so clear that like that impulse it can be a very protective one. It can protect the people who are the subjects, and it can also be a very generous one. It can be a gift of sorts. And I think there's something, we see a lot of films that combine fiction and documentary, but I think the role of fiction is it's so clear in your film, like what it's how it works for the people involved.
Yeah, I think art, and I don't know, I feel with these paintings of these Renaissance paintings, and with painting and with many films actually, I think there are some films that saved me. I mean, how to tell you? It's not that I was going to die, but there was something of me that was dying. And so I believe that and when you talk about this thing of healing, there's something inside you that is a bit broken, and then you see a film or, I don't know, a painting, and they have this sort of power. So maybe fiction actually has this power of healing something. It was interesting because I showed the film to my family in January, the 5th of January of this year. They were very, very excited. I was very nervous. I didn't sleep for a week, of course. And then in the end, something very beautiful happened. One of my uncles, he came to me and he was like, Catarina, maybe some of these things, they didn't happen, but maybe they did. And I thought, this connects with what you were saying about fiction and about maybe it gives us some sort of, maybe it did.
Yeah. I think that's a nice place to end, although maybe I do actually maybe have just one final question for you, which is, this is your first feature film. And it's so interesting how it brings your background in music and in fine art is so present in your cinema. So I'm just wondering, like, what we can expect next from you? Like, are you already thinking about the next project?
Yeah, I am thinking about the next project, and for now it has the work in progress name of Unfinished Painting, because it is about painting.
Okay.
So there you go.
Great.
And it has music and it has death as well. So I'm very boring. I'm not very creative in my themes. So yes, it totally connects with what you just said, actually. So I don't think I can make it in another way, because this is how I grew up to be. This is how I've learned to play with things. So I guess these references, they will always be there, I guess.
Well, it's good that they're big subjects. So I'm looking forward to the next one. But Catarina, thanks so much. Thanks so much for this wonderful Dennis. Film, and thank you for being part of our festival.
Thank you so much.